Okay. Want to go to the next?
Yeah, which is the next one? Oh, okay. Oh, cool. And thankfully, not as hot as it. Oh yeah, earlier in the week that was a boiler. That particular location is always the hottest. I don't know why, but then it gets hotter as you go through it. It starts out and you're like, oh, this is hot. By the time you're in the end, you're like, how is it getting hotter? But today's not bad. So we're gonna just follow me because it's kind of a weird path to get out of here right now. Photograph. I have to see if there was two graphics that like got so hot they melted and fell off the wall.
Oh my gosh.
I have to just check and see if those are been.
So it's real
fixed.
hot, right?
Yeah.
It's really hot.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
over 100 degrees in there when it's hot.
Wow.
It's in a black tent, so that
Yeah,
raises the
totally.
temperature by
Yeah,
10
we're-
degrees.
Oven.
So it cooks. Yeah. Okay, so we got everybody. All right. Here we did a house called Monstruos, the Nightmares of Latin America. Actually designed that house with the idea of doing this house. And it was designed with the idea that there would be a sequel, but that really depended on how it was received by our guest. This was the fan favorite like house everybody talked about last year. So we moved on to phase two. In the house last year, we had set up the mythology for it is that this is the cemetery of the lost. This is the cemetery where all the people who are killed by the monsters and characters from Latin American myths and legends. This is where they're buried. There's a caretaker who presides over this cemetery. He's kind of like a Latin American Grim Reaper, if you will. We call him Muerte, which is death. But we realized last year, we're like, oh, we never actually said what his name was. So we decided this year we would kind of play with that. So Muerte's out front. And he's the one character we brought back from last year. So he's the narrator again. He's out front. He's tending his cemetery. He's got a big sack of bones that he's putting into this wheelbarrow and collecting bones. And he's talking to you as you're waiting in line and about to come into the experience. He's telling you about the three monstruos that we're going to be featuring in this house. And those are El Charro, which is translates roughly to, it's sometimes called El Charro Negro, the dark horseman or the black horseman. It's kind of a skeletal figure in a charro suit. And a charro suit is like, if you see what mariachis wear today, that comes from the charro suit. It's a suit that originally was worn by the Spanish when they colonized Mexico, and then eventually got adapted into Mexican culture. And now today is a symbol of Mexico. But that's what this character wears. He wears an all black charro suit for just a coincidence. But all of the characters we're featuring, these monsters, are all described as having glowing eyes. So every one of them, all their masks are built so that their eyes light up and glow. The second character is El Cadejo. El Cadejo is pretty much like a devil dog. The myth of that story is that God created a white dog that would be like a spirit animal for people and help guide them on the path to righteousness and get them to the paradise at the end of their life. But the devil got jealous and made a dog of his own and sent that dog to earth to mess with all of that. So that's El Cadejo. And then the last one is El Cucuy, sometimes called El Coco, depending on what part of the world you're in. That's a story that originated in Portugal. Essentially, it's the Latin American boogeyman, but then it came over with the colonization of Mexico. And has spread throughout Latin America. El Cucuy is the classic story that like parents tell their kids to get them to behave. It's like, go to sleep or the monster's under your bed is going to take you away to his cave in the mountains and eat you. What's interesting about El Cucuy is there's all these different stories about him, but the myth is that no one has ever seen his face and lived. Yet there's all these descriptions of what he supposedly looks like. So we use that as inspiration for our character design. There's two graves here. There's a rich man's grave, and then there's a poor boy's grave. And this is inspired by a story that came from Mexico. I want to say it was Guanajuato. It might have been Guadalajara. But a lot of the cemeteries in that part of the country are believed to be haunted, and there's lots of myths and legends about them. The dolls that you see in the tree, that's inspired by a real place in Mexico called the Island of Dolls. Have you guys ever heard about this? Google Island of Dolls. It's one of the creepiest things you'll ever see. Um, that particular story is that this man lived on this island by himself, and that one day a drowned little girl washed on shore, and he built a little memorial to her with like dolls, and then he became convinced that he was being haunted by her spirit. So he just obsessively started putting dolls everywhere, all over the island, and just left them there. So when he died, all these dolls had been hanging on trees and all over the island for years and years and years, and it's a ton of them. And they just got moldy and just and scary looking. And now it's a dark tourism site. It's a place people go to. So we incorporated a little bit of that in there. We also incorporated a little of Dia de los Muertos in here, particularly in the El Cucuy section. I'll talk about that when we get to it. But the beginning of this, you're going to walk into the crypt, past some bodies, and we're going to end up in a cantina, which is where El Charro's story starts. Oh, it's fixed. Okay. And they replaced the graphic, so you're fine taking pictures of anything in here. It's no problem. Graphic was replaced, so you could take pictures of it if you want. Okay. It literally like just peeled and fell off onto the ground.
Didn't last year, I remember there was like rain damage or something right before.
Yeah, we've had, when we do candles like this, sometimes we've come in, we've gotten smart now and they're not wax.
Right.
But I've come in and they're all melted.
Oh,
They're just
no.
pools of wax.
Eesh.
So last year we used this idea to kind of set up the three different characters, and we brought that idea back, and then of course introduced the new characters, and that's to do like a crypt painting or an altar painting. That's going to set up each of the characters before we go into them. So this is all original artwork that we create with our in-house artist Lucas Kolsha. This particular piece of art, I was speaking at Midsummer Scream in July. And Universal Products and Experiences, which is the group within Universal that does all of the retail and merchandise, asked me if I could do a signing in their booth. So we did a limited edition print of this artwork and signed it for all the fans. El Charro, his story, and I should preface this with, all of these stories were primarily handed down word of mouth. And then eventually somebody wrote them down. So there's all these different iterations of pretty much all of these different stories. So when we're researching this, we kind of decide, oh, I like this version of the story. There was one particular story of El Charro that I really liked, but the common thing that everybody knows about him is that he rides a horse. He tends to be roaming like crossroads outside of town. He's always got a bag of gold with him, and he tries to offer you his bag of gold because he's been condemned to hell. And he's allowed to come out of hell at night, certain times during the year, and ride. And if he can get somebody to take that bag of gold, they have to take his place in hell. And even his horse was condemned to hell. That's why it looks the way it was. But there's this other iteration of the story that is kind of the leaping off point for us. And that is, and the names change. Sometimes this guy is referred to as Juan. Sometimes he's referred to as Jose. But there's one iteration of the story that talks about this miner who is struggling. He's poor. He works all day in this mine. He has a large family he has to support. And one night after work, instead of going home to his wife and kids, he goes to the cantina with some of his buddies from the mine and starts having drinks. And then he just keeps going and drinks and drinks and drinks. And eventually his friends, he gets boisterous and loud, and his friends are like, okay, time to go. And pretty much he's in there by himself, which is the bartender. But even the bartender leaves. But at one point he yells out, "Life is so unfair. I would give anything to be wealthy and powerful." And at that moment, in walks a guy in a black dark suit, sits down next to him and says, "I can make your dreams come true." When he wakes, he makes a deal, which presumably is a deal with the devil. When he wakes up the next morning, he finds sacks of gold in his barn everywhere. He starts buying the best clothes, and he starts, buying the most expensive meals, and he has girlfriends in every town, and he just kind of, frivolously fritters that money away. Towards the end of his life, he realizes, damn it, I made a deal with the devil. I got to get out of this. So he gets on his fastest horse. He grabs whatever gold he can carry, which is just a sack of gold, and he rides as fast as he can. The devil catches up with him, and the devil says, "You're going to hell, and so's your horse. But I'll make you a deal," and that's what I was just talking about. Every once in a while, I'll let you out of hell. If you get somebody to accept that bag of gold, they can take your place in hell. So this is the first time we see El Charro. Every time we see him, he's got that sack of gold. And then we're going to walk through kind of a tight section. It's the storeroom for this cantina. Oh, that's his horse, by the way. I forgot to mention that. That's a puppeted effect, so that horse tracks forward and comes into the scene. You're going to see all the sacks of gold. You're going to hear El Charro's voice in the house saying, riches beyond measure. And then when you get to the last section of this, it looks like hell. There's all these chained up bodies being eternally burned. And you hear El Charro say, the only price is your soul. But all throughout this, you're getting attacked by El Charro as you go through. So we'll go through this. Some of these you can see in the daylight. They're cool. Fiber optic white stain, gold sparkle. This watch on the ground looks like there's a lighting instrument sitting on the ground. Just watch out for that. That's one of the things El Cadejo does, is he apparently eats children. So there's a lot of things that eat children in this house. And then as soon as you get past this graphic, you run into El Cadejo. So obviously El Cadejo is all done with puppets since he's a dog. It kind of sucks to have to wear a dog costume and run around on all fours. So
Hard to get dog scare actors.
yeah, hard to get dogs to do that. And then from here, we're going to go into like a miner's camp, and everybody's dead, and you're just being attacked by El Cadejo as you go through this hallway that takes us to the El Cucuy section. And then we reach the last altar painting, which isn't here right now because this one is a trick. It's being printed on like 4-way stretch material with a little hidden slit. So it looks like all the others, but then El Cucuy can bust through it. So El Cucuy, which is the last of our monster characters, that story starts at a house during Dia de los Muertos. That's a time of year where people erect altars in their houses, ofrendas, to make offerings to the spirits of their loved ones and relatives that they kind of welcome into their house at that time of the year. So the idea for us is like, well, if you're welcoming all these spirits into your house, what if something else got in, which is El Cucuy. So we go this way. So you can see up on the roof is El Cucuy's sack with all the little kitties that he's kidnapped on this night. He's going to be up there as well. We have a big figure of him that's coming in, looking down at you. And then there's an El Cucuy live performer. When he hits his trigger, the lightning will light up the figure on the roof, and then when the lights go out, the performer comes around the corner. Then we go inside. So I mentioned the house is set up for Dia de los Muertos. In this scene, we're doing an effect where the performer who's going to be coming out of that door back there, when he hits his trigger, it creates a video where you see the shadow of El Cucuy carrying his sack, and then it disappears, and then the performer comes out through the door. And that's because El Cucuy can be sometimes a shapeshifter. He can take on different forms. Sometimes he's described as being able to get into your house as a mist or as a shadow. So we wanted to play that off as well. And then all through the house section, we're heading towards the little boy's bedroom, but you're being attacked by El Cucuy all the way through. So this is paying off the classic part of the El Cucuy story, which is the monster under your bed. So as you come into the scene, there's a puppeteer behind the wall. That puppeteer's got a monitor. He can see you coming into the scene. When they activate their lighting and audio, they can make these giant monster hands come out from under the bed, which is distressing to this young boy. He's obviously crying. And then the last part of El Cucuy's story is that once he kidnaps the kids, he takes them to his mountain lair. He has a cave up in the mountains where he lives, where he eats them. So as we get through this last section of the house, we're going to end up at his mountain lair. So we kind of brought our own thing to the story in that we thought, well, if he spends all his time kidnapping kids out of houses, he probably took some souvenirs along the way. So we have a collection of toys that El Cucuy has stolen from all of these kids that he's abducted over the years. So his entire lair is decorated with them. He also has all these rotting pumpkins because in Portugal, where the story comes from, the cocoa also there's certain translations of that mean like what a pumpkin is, like the earliest forms of jack-o'-lanterns. So there's all these rotten pumpkins in here, and that's where you're pumping in the smell of pumpkins as you're going through this. There's other characters in the scene as well. There's kind of living doll, like creepy little doll characters that we see as we go through this section, a boy and a girl. And they're again kind of inspired by Island of the Dolls, as is all of this stuff. And then eventually we're going to meet El Cucuy face to face in his lair, which I'll show you on the other side of this.
Love when you guys do these giant.
Yeah, we have a lot of these now.
They're so
We
great.
do a whole house of giant
Yeah,
puppet
yeah. They are wonderfully effective.
I love he's got kids in his mouth.
Oh, he does. Oh, yeah.
Oh my god, that's amazing!
Oh, my God, that's crazy.
That is.
So this is a big puppet effect. So the whole, as soon as you step through that curtain, this whole thing comes forward. His eyes light up. Yeah. And drooling. So like those are the hands that come out from under the bed, those big hands.
Oh, cool.
Let me know when you've got him because I'm holding him up because
Yeah.
he's being hung right now. And if I let go of him, he just sinks back down. I'm just going to go, no.
The bobble that you never wanted.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They're putting in some bungees for him. So he's kind of moving around a lot. And then we got to dress. He still has to get dressed. He gets his cloak and his whole hood and all that.
It was at the end.
Yeah, it's like it's the scale of it.
Mega Chucky.
They did at the movie.
Doesn't matter what it is. Like a big thing.
They did. They had the dream sequence.
Yeah,
And
dream sequence. That's where
Cool.
we got that from.
Yeah.
Yeah, Colt Chucky. There's like weird dream sequence.
the hallway there.
Red Dwarf's daughter. Okay. Last couple.
You standing there in front of the word death is great.
I feel like
That's my business.
should be foreshadowings. So this is the bookend with Muerte. I mentioned that out front, we never said his name before. So part of the dialogue of what he's doing, which I wrote in English and Spanish, he keeps interacting with people and saying, "Oh, we've met before, haven't we? Do you remember my name? Do you remember my name?" And then when you get to this point, he says again, "Do you remember my name?" And then you see that his name is Death. And he takes his big shovel and tries to add you to his cemetery. And that's the final scene. It's actually a little shadier. See what I mean? Like, do you feel it hotter?
Yeah.
It's hotter as you go through it. Right outside here, there's a lovely shady spot. So if you guys want to gather for questions, answer them. I should go through here. Yeah, you do see people like
Just
literally
go down.
go down.
Yeah. Because of the volume of people you've got going
People
through.
react in different ways. Like some people, like when they get scared, they laugh.
Yeah.
You know, some people try to use whoever's in front of them as a human
Shield.
shield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've gone sometimes when I'm walking somebody through the house, like you know, somebody we might work with her, and then they like grab you and they just use you as a human shield.
I've had strangers. I had this
Yeah.
girl going through Freddy vs. Jason here once, just grabbed me.
Yeah.
I was like, "Who are you, man?"
It's all just in how
Just like,
people
please
react.
protect me.
But this house, Monstruos, is part of kind of a larger program we do here at Universal Studios Hollywood with celebrating Latin American culture, myths, and legends. Hey, there's a monster. It's the scariest thing I've seen all day. Tech director. I totally lost my train of thought. So this house empties into a scare zone, Luchadores Monstruosos, which is celebrating luchador cinema from Mexico of the 60s and 70s, but also the lucha libre. So it's monster wrestlers fighting monster wrestlers. So we created our own luchadors, we created all this original artwork and characters. And then when you get to the end of the scare zone, that kind of feeds back to the Universal Plaza, which is a big celebration of Dia de los Muertos with food and bar. La Llorona will be there, Catarina. So to me, and this is very intentional, we designed it this way, it's like a mini land within the theme park that's specifically dedicated to Latin American content. And that's just because of where we are. We're in Los Angeles. That's the heritage of our city. And it's been something we've been doing in Horror Nights. We started doing content in 2010. So it's been a long time, but now it's grown over the years till it's its own thing. And pretty much every year we've been doing that with this location.
Are you ever surprised at what horror houses hit and are popular? Like you said, this one
Yeah,
was a big
it's hard to
hit.
predict. Yeah, it is hard to predict what a guest is going to decide is their favorite. So much is dependent on performers, because if you can really tell from rehearsal, like sometimes you walk through in a rehearsal and you're just like, oh, well, that's ready to open, and some needle, and it just, and the content, there's certain movies that are just perfect for this, Insidious, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They're just kind of by design, they're perfect for what we do. And there's other ones that are like a totally different challenge. This year, what I think is cool, and it's something we try to do every year with our slate when we're curating it, is because horror has evolved over time. When we started doing this 20 years ago, almost, it was pretty much exclusively focused on slashers. It was Freddy, Jason, Leatherface, Michael Myers. And we still have an element of that with Texas, the new house we're doing with Texas this year. But horror as a genre has really expanded with the rise of streaming and just so much content out there that we're trying to kind of tap into all of that. So obviously this house is Latin American horror. Insidious is paranormal horror. Ghostbusters is comedy horror. What we're doing downstairs with Insidious, with The Weeknd, is something entirely on its own. It's surreal, it's trippy. So we're just trying to hit all of those different aspects of horror for our fans to present like a balanced slate, if you will.
You're living in the dream time.
Yeah, I mean, horror has grown tremendously, throughout my lifetime, when I was a kid, I was watching, Universal Monsters movies on Saturday, afternoon television. But now it's pretty much everywhere.
Are you looking for, or have you gotten scare actors with some wrestling prowess for this scare zone?
It was fun to train them because I didn't have to do much. I have a group of former performers and current performers who we work with every year that I block the scenes with them and with what we call our show captains, show them what I want. And then they spend a lot of time in rehearsal with the cast. And then I come in. But when I was working with this cast, and tonight we did this one kind of at the same time we did the house, but tonight will be all the other streets and scare zones. But there's kind of two performers in this that are like the tag team. They're like the heroes. And their choreography that our show team brought to it as well. They were already doing all these tag team kind of moves, not like fighting, wrestling, but the way they were working off each other and kind of grabbing each other's hands and spinning off each other. And it already had that vibe. So that was cool. What was interesting about the rehearsal is it wasn't in costume or makeup. We are going to do a dress rehearsal a little bit later on next week, but this was just everybody in street clothes. And I could literally walk through and go, oh, you're the Frankenstein luchador, you're the werewolf one, you're the skeleton one. I could tell what all the characters were with just seeing how they were physicalizing it, which was really cool. Any other questions?
Is there like special, you were talking about there'll be food and drink. Is there stuff that's like special to Halloween Horror Nights?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, all across the board. There's a whole food and beverage program that's unique to Horror Nights, and some of it's tied into the properties we're doing, where there's a Texas Chainsaw Massacre barbecue downstairs, fully themed out, and you can sounds bizarre, but
Secrets
it's
in the meat.
very popular last time we did it. Secrets in the sauce. And for the weekend, we have a full-blown bar that we're doing just for the weekend. But then our chef creates all these custom items that are just sold during horror nights, both main courses and he's making. I've seen Did we do our announcement about food and beverage? I mean, like the weekend, there's a lot of things that involve a heart. So he made a giant gummy heart. I mean, it's like really big. It's like bigger than a normal heart, and all kinds of different drinks and desserts and main courses. And there is a food in the plaza as well. So there's special taco creations along with all the different drinks that they offer. So yeah, it's a full program.
Very cool. That must be fun.
Yeah, I think he has fun creating all that.
I'm curious with Chainsaw, just because obviously you've done that property a few times, but this time you're able to kind of pull from across the franchise.
Yeah.
It's like, is that cool to kind of give a little bit of a greatest hit?
Yeah, because we knew that this was the 50th anniversary, and I had been talking to the people who I've always worked with on Texas Chainsaw, but we've done it a lot. You know, we've done it. This is the 7th time that franchise in some way, shape, or form, and it's been different a lot of times.
Yeah.
But we've done the original film at least 2 times. So I knew I wanted to change it. I didn't want to just come back and go, okay, here's Texas Chainsaw Massacre again. The people who I worked with on it had an idea they threw out, which was, what if you take a multiverse approach to Texas, because they own and control all the different iterations of Leatherface in the 9 films that exist in the franchise. So I went, oh, let me think about that. And what I ultimately did is I watched, the original movie again. And there's one line that the hitchhiker says early on when the teenagers do what you should never do in a horror movie, which is pick up a guy who looks crazy standing on the side of the road and give him a ride. But they ask him about, did you work in the slaughterhouse? Because there was a slaughterhouse in this town. And he says, I worked at the slaughterhouse. My brothers did too. Grandpa did too. He was the best killer there ever was. And he goes on this whole spiel about the slaughterhouse. But we know the slaughterhouse isn't operating. It's closed down. But you never see it. You never actually go there in the original film. It's just talked about. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a parallel timeline, if you will, that runs concurrent to the events in the 74 film, but happens in an entirely different place. And because Leatherface, as defined by Gunnar Hassan, who played him in the film, the way he always thought about him is he wore these skin masks because he has no personality of his own. He puts them on depending on what he's doing. If he's hunting, he puts on the killing mask. If he's going to the dinner table scene, he's wearing the pretty woman mask because it's like a formal occasion. If he's in the kitchen cleaning up after stuff, he's wearing the old woman mask because he's like more of like a domestic. So I basically researched the heck out of slaughterhouses in the turn of the century and especially when they became industrialized with the Chicago stockyards. That was really the first assembly line before Henry Ford. That's where Henry Ford got his idea, but it was the disassembly line. It was a factory designed to take an animal and go through all of these stages until every single byproduct had a purpose and was being sold for something. So I took all of the roles that you would find in a slaughterhouse and I assigned him to different iterations of Leatherface and his family. And then at the very end, that story dovetails back to the original film in our house. And you come back to the farmhouse and you come back to the steel door to where the first murder took place. So it's something totally original that we came up with as a way to do something new and exciting with that franchise.
Yeah. Sounds awesome.
Maybe one more question? Any other questions? Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining.